afternoon. Welcome to the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session for Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. It's 1:03 p.m. My name is Ty Mentor, Chair of the Board. To my left is Vice Chair Commissioner Wayne Fournier and Commissioner Carolina Mejia. Commissioner Edwards, we believe, will be joining us, and Commissioner Klaus will be joining us in just a few moments. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. We are live streaming, Megan? Yes. Okay. County Manager Leonard Hernandez and Assistant County Managers Robin Campbell and Rob Gilder. We're here to cover a couple of elected officials meetings in sequence. District Court is up first, and then the Treasurer's Office. We have Judge Buckley from the District Court and Frankie Peters from the District Court Administrator. Is that your official title?
Court Executive Officer.
Court Executive Officer. We made that change. Okay, good. To do the presentation, anything to set up, County Manager?
Nothing to set
Straight
up.
to Judge Buckley.
Straight over.
Welcome.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too.
All right. Well, first, my first meeting with our new county manager, Leonard. Is that?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So nice to meet you. And let's start off with a little aside that I had with Commissioner Klaus. She attended one of our recent Veterans Court graduations, and noted in the graduation the presentation of a quilt to our graduate. And she and I were speaking about that, and I said, you know, the folks who do this, they're just quilters in the community. It's a group of about, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 women. And they've been making quilts for every graduate from Veterans Court for probably about 13 years now, just on their own.
They're the same people that make the quilts for Monarch, because Monarch has a group of quilters that the women are making quilts for everybody else.
They do solely quilts, what are called quilts of valor. Huh. They go to veterans, and it's a, you know, it's a nationwide thing, and so every, you know, when they do one, they say, okay, this is number 398,120, you know, quilts. But they haven't obviously done them all, but there are organizations around the country. And so this group of folks has been doing it every year for about 13 years now for every graduate from Veterans Court. And we're talking king-size quilts here that they make, and they stitch a label on with the graduate's name, and they really personalize it, and then they have a whole presentation ceremony they go through, which is a really neat thing. And these are all sort of patriotic quilts, as you might imagine, for a quilt of valor. And so Commissioner Klaus saw this, and you know, it's like, whoa, that's pretty neat. And we were talking about it, and I said, I think it would be a great idea if the commission recognized this group of community members who have just on their own volunteered to do this. You know, for every graduate we've had, and other people we've had for the last 13 years. And she said, oh, that'd make a great sort of Veterans Day week presentation. So if we could do something for them, I think it would be a great recognition of their community service that they very quietly provide to the community and this particular group of our community members. And have for so long. I think it would be really neat to honor them. Can Commissioner Klaus hear me? Hopefully she's not listening.
No, she's got an appointment.
She's a veteran.
Yeah.
And so I've talked to the quilters saying that if we get this set up, they will make a quilt and present it to her at that presentation and surprise her with it, because she's entitled to it as a veteran. So anyway, that's my thought. I hope she was going to speak to the rest of you. She told me about maybe setting something up like that right around Veterans Day. And I thought it'd be a great Veterans Day program for the commission to take up.
A second veteran sitting on the Gary. Wasn't Gary in the Army?
Turn off my phone.
Gary's a veteran as well.
I'm sorry?
Gary's a veteran as well.
Okay. Well, we better take care of that too. Okay, we can handle that. So anyway, if you would think about it, and then if it's going to happen, you know, give me some advance warning so I can get with the quilters and get them working on the quilts.
What's the name of?
Quilts of Valor. You know, I think they call themselves Stars and Stripes Quilters now. You know, they've had a couple names. They make quilts about. I think they call themselves Stars and Stripes Quilters.
Yeah, they participate in different, I've had many interactions with them just in the community with different, they also donate their quilts to like organizations or auctions and similar things as well. I think it would be great. I'm looking towards, asking for the name, that way Amy can possibly help coordinate something for veterans.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to make that decision so they have lead time to get what's gonna happen on their end.
Right, well, they could just show up if you did it, but
It's-
I want to add something to it.
Yeah,
since
It's a
they're-
perfect time for us to like ask it to move forward without our two veterans present so we can surprise them. We got fun.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty neat.
Yeah, I think that's, follow up on that, Amy.
All right, have that important business out of the way. Now we'll get into just our general conversation. And the rest of you have heard this, but our new county manager hasn't, so this will be his introduction to the big push that we're going to be continuing to make till we actually accomplish this, is to recognize that the judicial parts of county government are not accurately reflected on the current county org chart, even the new one, which I have here. Courts are separate but equal branches of government. So they are equal to the executive, they're equal to the legislative, and they should be portrayed that way on the county org chart. So I think we, number one, just visually for the citizens of the community to understand how that the county is properly organized, we ought to redo our county org chart. And it's my opinion that the way it currently is designed doesn't do that. And we have a suggestion for you. If you just roll right there, it shows courts, legislative, and executive. And I think that would be a more appropriate diagram for the county organization, reflecting the status of the judicial branches of government. Now, this isn't just an academic exercise. It has real-world consequences, which we will be talking about a lot should this happen. And those real-world consequences, because we've never done this before, the courts haven't insisted on it, and the board has never really thought of it in those terms and acted in those terms. We have always been sort of presumed to be just part of the regular county government, and in a variety of ways. Really, under the constitutional statutory requirements for this branch of government, the primary function of the legislative branch would be to determine the funding for the judicial branch. And that's principally it. And then the executive has no authority over the legislative branch. That needs to start making its way into the process of how we handle the things that come from the court. So, for example, there shouldn't be decisions made about court-related issues without at least the court being invited to be here for a meeting and where their decisions are going to be made about court matters. And also, as an example, we had submitted through the normal county process as if we were just another part of the executive, just another department, a request to reclass certain positions. And that was denied by the board because you're not doing any reclass now. My position is that the board doesn't have the authority to deny a request from the courts to reclass positions. The court sets up its organizational structure. The court has the authority to do so under the separate but equal concept Frankie, as the court executive officer, is the equivalent of Leonard as the county manager. So Frankie has that same authority, and he has the authority to administratively run all the procedures of the court. So when we say, here's how we want to organize our court, here's how we want to create these positions, we don't call Frankie a court administrator, which had been sort of the traditional way of looking at it, which makes him sound like he's just part of the county government. We don't call our former number 2 person an assistant county or court administrator. We call that person a court operations officer. We call the person in charge of the finance section our chief financial officer. We do that for a purpose, because we're going to try to reshape how all of us have to think about this unwieldy, separate but equal branch of government. I think it's really important that we make this change. And so, in my view, when something like, here's how we want to redefine our positions, the job specs for those positions, that when that comes before the board, it's like the vice president getting the electoral votes from 50 states. The vice president has one job: to certify, say yes. In my opinion, that's the board's job. You get a request from us about how we want to organize, your job is to say, yes, that's what the court wants, and just verify that's what we submitted, and then the answer is, yeah, that's how we are organized. So, you know, that's way different than it's ever been done. I get that. But it really impacts our ability to accomplish our mission. And so this is going to be our mission now, is to get the county to recognize that. And I think the first step would be to changing the county org chart to properly reflect the relationship of the judicial branch of county government relative to the executive and the legislative branch of county government. So we have the proposed org chart. Hopefully you see the wisdom of that. I'm happy to try to answer questions on this. This will be an ongoing thing. We will continue to talk about this because it impacts all kinds of things we are trying to accomplish in managing the business of the courts. So, Frank, you want to describe our internal management now?
Absolutely. So as far as how we're set up structurally within the district court, I think it's familiar to many of you. We have our court executive officer, our executive leadership, as well as our managers for each of the departments provided here. Now, as far as how we're set up currently, as Judge Buckley was discussing, very similarly to our executive level here, our executive leadership, and our management for our department. As far as one of the issues between the organizations and how they're proposed is there is an equality between how we're structured and how the executive branch is structured as well. So if you look at our court executive officer, for instance, that organizationally is actually under that of a director for a department for the county. And then that inequality continues throughout our organizational structure within district court. Though, again, we have a very similar structure to, I'm spinning the wrong way, apologies, to our local executive branch. So that's one of the first issues that we have as far as the equality between the structures. And then the next piece is what Judge Buckley was referring to, as well as the specifications. So the ones that we have here, yellow, green, and blue, those are specifications that we've identified that we've been working on, started working on those about 4 years ago. Starting about 3 years ago is when we had started to have conversations with county in request for moving those specifications forward. And for the last 3 years, we've been receiving roadblocks and being able to get those to county, to the board. Some of those due to class comp being on the horizon, class comp being in process, delays around those. And then recently, I believe, Maria was here presenting other reclassification requests from other departments to come through. And these specifications were selected not to move forward through that process. Though with these specifications, each of them are currently outside, or these positions are working outside of their specifications. They're not accurate. Regarding Supreme Court rule, regarding just the basic day-to-day roles and responsibilities of each position and the qualifications that go with each of those positions. So they're not accurate. We've identified them a few years ago and have been working avidly to push those forward so that we can get our specifications to match what these positions are actually doing to support the needs of the court.
Yeah, and one of the things to note about that is, we get that this is not a decision without consequence, because as you can imagine, we're going to come back and ask you to fund this appropriately because we think we've been significantly underfunded for years and years and years. And there's a variety of ways we can show you that. So for example, looking at this diagram here, the colored boxes are the 6 that are blue, green, or yellow are the ones that we put forward for the change in specifications. The 2 in red are ones we don't have. And we will be asking you to authorize our creation of those positions because we need those positions to manage the various departments that they would be in charge of under the court organization. So ultimately, we would be asking for additional FTEs for those positions and for you to agree to the change in specs for the other positions that are reflected on that board. And we're also going to eventually be asking you for a substantial increase in FTEs, and we'll make our case for that in a few minutes. But I think conceptually, it's really important that we will continue to make this argument that we need to rethink how the court is. And this board hasn't had to face this issue. No boards have had to face this issue, so it's going to be, as we say, an issue of first impression going forward and trying to figure out how we all coexist in that situation. But from where I sit, I think it's essential to appropriate governing of the work that we have in the legislative or the judicial branch of government.
So, and then this next slide here is the positions within our department. Same with the specifications that we've been looking at. We've also been going through each of our lines of business and identifying what the need is for each of those departments so that we can appropriately staff each of these departments to do the work that is needed. These are needs that are identified, not the wants that are here in red. There's a few within multiple departments, and then, as you can see, within our probation department. Each of these have been reviewed internally based off of the need, based off of the workload, not just the caseload of each of the departments. And in regards to the probation, what we also did is coupled that information with the workload study that was presented by the National Center for State Courts in June, I believe, of last year. That workload study was the basis for one of our requests last year. So based off of the numbers that we have internally and what was provided for that study, this is what the projected need is for probation in order to appropriately support the work that they do there. And as far as probation, how we have that set up right now, with the loss of our supervised probation, we still have our mental health probation counselors, TST funded, that have a specialized caseload for mental health specific defendants that are that opt into that program. We no longer have supervised probation. We do have one staff that is monitoring everything else. Right now up on the board, we have 1,600 cases. This was last month, so we are probably closer to 1,800 cases at this time that this person is attempting to monitor for compliance and report to the court if there are any non-compliance, so we can attempt to get them before the judge in a relatively quick manner, which has been delayed. Based off of the National Center for State Courts workload study, that position is currently at about 400% of their workload capacity. and it shows. We've been continuing to look at roles and responsibilities of probation, how everything works through the judicial process, through the courtrooms, and have also coupled that with information that we have looked at in the past. We've had a similar situation that's come up where in 2008 there was a funding reduction for the court and we had lost probation back then. So what we ended up doing is we actually looked at the data and statistics from around that time frame as well. So if we look at pre-2008, post-2008, when those budget cuts happened, we ended up seeing an 11% increase in our non-compliance hearings, 23% increase in warrants issued, and an 8% increase in recidivism rates, just between those 2 points in time. With any of these, there are obviously multiple points of contact within our justice system that have an increased cost for those services. Each case of recidivism that could have been resolved, or warrants, there's going to be law enforcement contact, there's attorney work, prosecutor work, jail bed costs, correction time. So we went through and put together an estimate for this point in time again, and what that cost would be. And that was about $1 million per year that we would see an increased cost following or due to these increases.
So let me give some background because I know Leonard's new to the county. So there was a budget cut last year directed by the commissioners, and we, I believe, had a 4% budget cut. The only non-mandatory function in district court is probation. Everything else we do is statutorily mandated. So the only place we could take that cut was in probation, which is why we're talking specifically about a probation issue today. We just want to, make sure everybody fully understands what the result of the decision directing us to take that 4% budget cut was. And Frankie laid it out, statistically there on the screen. So what we've seen since the 1st of January is that the response we've taken to losing probation, say for one person who's handling 1,600 cases, is that we have started scheduling many more compliance hearings where the judges actually have to do that, as opposed to some of the other things we're doing. And we've seen a doubling of the number of compliance cases from January to now than we would normally see in that time period. And that means we are spending more time in court on compliance-related issues than we used to have to. So we look at this and say, okay, this is untenable, especially if that growth rate continues. And what's our response to that? Well, we have a few ways we could respond. We could say, okay, this is adding to our in-court load. So do we come to the commissioners and say it's time to go to the legislature and ask for another district court judge, and we need 2 clerks to support that judge, and we need a new courtroom for that judge to operate? Do we take that approach and say, okay, it's the workload because we're not going to do it via probation. We don't have the folks being monitored anymore, so the judges are going to have to do the monitoring, and we need another judge to do that in the courtroom, so on and so forth. That could be one response. Another response could be, we won't impose any conditions. What if on DUIs or DV cases where we have traditionally tried to address recidivism issues by getting folks into treatment, hopefully increasing the likelihood that they will not recidivate, and in some cases we're statutorily mandated by law to require certain treatments. What if we either don't impose that or we just don't follow it? Well, there are problems both ways. If we impose it but don't have anybody tracking it, because we can't keep adding cases onto one person who's monitoring 1,600 cases. So if we don't track it, if we just say, okay, yeah, you're supposed to do this, and then we just step back, the county has a significant liability issue because we're supposed to be tracking it, and nothing's being done, and somebody who's told to go do a DUI assessment and doesn't do it, and we don't know about it, or can't do anything about it, and they, run into a family on county roads, got a problem. And when they find out that, the county knew that they were supposed to be doing something, but the county, had no way of monitoring it. So there's a real liability risk in taking that approach, and that's not what we want from a public safety standpoint. What we want is active supervision of the people who are supposed to be being monitored post-sentence in a criminal case. So the other option would be rebuild probation. They do a really good job of monitoring that. They pull those cases away from the court, so the court doesn't have to do it. These folks that are coming into the court now typically would be going, in our case, down to the basement where our probation office is and seeing probation officers and having the probation officers work with them on meeting their sentence obligations and getting their treatment reports and making sure they're compliant with their testing and all those sorts of things. It's not happening now because we don't have the ability to do that. So this is really our way of just reminding everybody what the consequence of the direction to us to cut the budget was. And it's a painful problem, and we appreciate the position the board is in and having to monitor, its funds for all of county government. We're just letting you know this was a painful cut for us to take, and we don't have really any good options. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was fully aware of that. So, any questions?
One quick question, if I could, in terms of the estimated $1 million additional cost to local government, what is the source for that, or the site? Is it as well the National Center for State Courts, or?
That's not from National Center. That was all done internally. I ended up
Frankie
going through those
Center.
numbers. So that's based off of estimated time for attorneys and prosecutors per case, 4.5 hours, cost for that time, law enforcement cost for, and again, it's very rough estimate on the low end. Somebody decided for a DUI, 1 hour cost for law enforcement. In their time though, in many situations that it's gonna be more than an hour. There could be blood draws or anything like that come into play. So this is just taking the basic contact points, what those costs would be, and applying it to the number of cases that would be added.
Commissioner Mejia.
I have lots of comments, but I'll start with the question. And it's in regards to Scram, and I'm wondering, how is that program going? How are we doing on spending, those funds? Like, are we on track?
Right now, as far as where we're projected at under the 500,000. Right now, my estimate is about 450,000 of that total amount. So it's a little bit under, just because just like caseloads, we have a natural lull when we end up hitting the end of the year, beginning of the year, and those numbers start increasing. So we anticipate that to increase a little bit. There is a little bit of a reduction when we start looking at probation. Before we were talking about 80% being on pretrial monitoring, 20% being on probation. That percentage is changing a little bit. So we are seeing those impacts there, but it's still just a little bit because we only have data through April right now. So I'm hoping once we get the next 2 months, we'll be able to actually see a little bit more of a trend of what that's going to look like at the end of the year, and if there are any impacts due to this.
So the 20% that are Scram device as a part of the sentence, well, people are either waiting to get into treatment or people who we think aren't being adequately tested in treatment, we may keep them on Scram device. That 20% is going to the person who has the 1,600 cases. So if there's a Scram violation that is a positive UA, that's where that report of that positive UA is going, is to the person who has 1,600 cases on their desk or in their computer. So one of the things we've been seeing is we're not getting real timely reports on that post-disposition cases for somebody who's pled guilty and monitoring a sentence. Pretrial services receives the pretrial ones, and they get those to us pretty quickly, and we can get those on the calendar. So we need somebody to be looking at that, and right now we're having a tough time.
I think that's one of the things for the substance monitoring program that we have seen, I just started running the numbers this morning because I know the board's going to be talking about ARPA a little bit tomorrow, just in case there were any questions that came up about it. And I know the last time that we talked, one of the things that we were really proud of was the daily compliance rate for Scram. And that daily compliance rate has dropped a little bit because what we've been seeing is if somebody ends up violating, the time for that information to come in, get processed by this one staff person and get before a judge is longer now. So what we're seeing is, as opposed to somebody getting one violation, us being able to get them before the court very quickly, we're gonna get that violation, and the time between them having that violation and us getting them before the court, they're getting 2, 3, 4, 5 more violations before we can get it addressed in front of the court. So we've been seeing more of those situations where somebody, as opposed to having one violation, may have 5 or 6, which is kind of bringing those daily compliance rates down.
I had a question about the, you guys, we've talked about this internally, but since, you know, we're kind of representing it for the county manager and the other commissioners, I'm gonna kind of bring my question that you've probably heard before, but like, I like the, you know, I mean, I think it makes sense kind of organized by branches, and I like the organization and bringing that forward. But when we talk about, you know, how does that affect us on the ground? You know, like to me, I have an appreciation for the difference. And like, to me, an example was like COVID. You know, you guys did COVID the way you did it, and what we were doing didn't always, you know, apply to what the courts were doing. And that was in respect to the fact that we're different branches of government and whatnot, and you have different, you know, stuff that comes from the courts. On the reclasses, that to me is like right in the gray area, in the sense that, you know, I feel like with all my departments, but even the courts, even more so, because you're a different branch, I would lean heavily on, you know, deferring to your organizational thoughts of how things should be organized. But when the new position costs more money, I don't see how that doesn't cross directly into our purview. I mean, we couldn't just say yes, in my opinion, to changes that are gonna have financial impacts, because that's where our authorities overlap. And if you could just speak to that, because the reclasses is the example you used of how this might change things on a practical basis from the past.
Well, I recognize that there are real-world implications, but I think we have the authority to set the job specs, for example, for everybody. So, you know, at the least, that's what we want to accomplish, is not have somebody say, no, that's not what that job is defined at. This is a standard, you know, definition in the county, and you have to squeeze your court clerk into that job definition. No, that job definition makes no sense for what that person is.
So that's like a degree of independence from our HR department.
Yep. But, and I want to be clear, we're not asking for total independence in the sense of, I think the HR department does a great job. I just think we as a government need to recognize that the court constructs itself. Now, the funding, you know, becomes an issue, and, you know, I can, as I said at the beginning, you know, Frankie and Leonard have equivalent positions in my mind. You know, are their salaries going to be the same? Probably not, because Leonard has way more people he has to
But
manage.
Leonard's still under the Board of County Commissioners.
Sorry?
But Leonard is still under
He is.
the Board of County
Well, the
Commissioners.
commissioners are the legislative. Leonard,
We're not just legislative,
okay,
we're
well,
also
they are the
executive.
executive, true.
Yeah,
Okay.
so like you can't completely, and so if, I mean, saying that Frankie is
Frankie's
the
under-
equivalent.
Well, he is, because he's under the judges. So you're the elected
Yeah.
for the executive. I and my colleagues are the elected for the courts. Frankie reports to us, Leonard reports to you. So I think it's fairly equivalent.
So so in terms of the classifications and the court defining, I mean, I feel like this is the reason why we're in the position that the county's in, is because the county at one point allowed everyone to have their own classifications, and now we have all these classifications, and then trying to fit them in, and that's why the market study and the class and comp was so difficult, was because we have 1,000 different classifications for every different employee, and just in the trends that everyone is heading in is in the complete opposite direction. I kind of want to go back to, in terms of the organizational chart that, I didn't have any really real thoughts on it, but going back to, the separate but equal, and in terms of the presentation, I feel that the court is picking and choosing a lot of those checks, the nice parts, but not really addressing the balances part of it. And, those balances are set forth there by our laws and constitution, and not really seeing that acknowledgement of that. And the big part is, it is the budgetary implications, and anything that really has anything falls within our purview, right? We're the holders of the purse, to put it bluntly, right? And, and anything that has, anytime there's a classification that's changed, right? Or there has to be, of course, then the next step is that compensation piece. And usually you can't do one with it, usually is very interconnected, because as a classification changes and the job specs change, so does the compensation piece. And that's kind of where it falls under the board's purview. And it seems, again, there's going to have to be a lot more conversation about this, because I'm not, again, the organizational chart to me is something that we can address. It seems very straightforward. But when we start talking about having things brought in front of the board, and the board just saying yes without, there's also a lot of consequences that come with that. And it's putting the board in a very difficult situation and position.
Well, that was the whole point of this, is, like I said, when we raised this issue, this has not been done before. None of us grew up this way within this county government. So I think we're all going to have to, reorient how we look at this. And so having those conversations is exactly what we're asking for. Let's have it. Let's figure out how we have the court be separate but equal.
But you're saying that we're out of alignment with other jurisdictions and other counties?
Not organizationally, I'm not. No.
Okay, so we're not.
We'll talk about that in a moment, about other counties. We have a whole caseload issue we'll talk about. But as far as this organization goes, I think a lot of counties are organized this way. But there has been a push among courts, and Frankie and I have been parts of something called the National Association of Presiding Court Officials, where they have been really pushing this issue and encouraging courts to start asserting independence. That's something courts haven't done. They've just been there and not really dealt with this issue. So we have heard that clarion call from our colleagues, and we are raising that issue here. So that's the purpose. But we understand it's not going to be accomplished easy. I do think we should be able to write our own job specs. Now, how that fits in the county HR class, that's where we have the conversations. What does that mean? We can't write things that make everybody, the highest level paid person, on an equivalent county reimbursement, salary reimbursement. That's not.
Is someone saying you can't write job specs or classifications, or like write something and take it to HR and go and take it through the process? Because, there's other,
Yep.
there's other groups within the county that do exactly that.
That's what we've been having conversations with county, as far as getting at least the specs, just starting with the specs and getting those updated. And each time it's been, well, it's a process that we have to go through to identify all these different points. We can't make any changes currently to a class specification unless it's administrative in nature. So unless it's a small change that does not have any impact to the specs, that's not like what we're looking for here, because the specs don't match what the roles and responsibilities need to be to support the court. So we haven't been able to make any changes to our specifications because they fall outside of that county definition of administrative change.
And just as an FYI, this was brought forth to the state a couple of years ago, and the state decided not to pick this up as well, so.
County manager.
Yeah, it's nice to meet both of you.
Yep.
And obviously, 6 weeks in, I still need to be brought up to speed on the specifics of how the state of Washington does their interactions with counties. I do believe that there's enough consistency, from my understanding in California, that counties are really an arm of the state in their creation and how they're put together. And to Commissioner Fournier's comment, the optical issue with the org chart is that the Board of County Commissioners are over, yes, the county manager. Having them off to the side creates the impression that the county manager is directly responsible to the residents of the county. And I am through, though, the county commissioners who then appoint me. And so I think that the clarity about how that organizational reporting structure looks at first glance is important, so that it's clear as to what the commissioners' roles are and their appointment of a county manager and what the organization does underneath. To the current organization chart, what I do think is very positive is it does show all these, and there's a lot of elected offices here. It does show all those elected offices. I think there's probably too many to be brought up, although they could be. They do report directly to the residents of the county, which effectively shows a level of that independence, because as electeds, then you're working together. And the challenge with an org chart is to try to show the dynamics of how things flow while understanding that this is one organization. So when we have central services and in the spirit of economies of scale, how do we create a oneness within the organization with still having the flexibility to meet the needs of the elected offices? And would love to talk to you about what your struggles have been in looking at getting things through from a human resource standpoint, and echoing Commissioner Mejia's comments about, as you make changes, though, those have ramifications within the organization because there may be similarities to job duties in your specific area with someone over here. And so HR has to take a global, again, because we're one organization, has to take a look at how do those changes work. And I think that's something that you all have been struggling with for a little while with the class and compensation study, and no small feat. And I think to what Commissioner Mejia has said, the lack of consistency has created a wide range, which then creates more struggles. The wider the breach, the harder it is to bring folks in alignment in an environment where things may have been dated and now we're trying to update them in light of having some tight budget constraints. So lots of challenges to work through, but I'm interested in having those conversations offline and getting to learn more. I just wouldn't want anyone to think that the county manager's office is separate from the commissioner's office. To Commissioner Fournier's point, their executive role is in partnership with the county manager, as there's some delegated and some directly that they operate in, and it's not off to the side. It's not they just legislate and tell and create policies and procedures, but yet we're here doing our own things separate. That's really not how
Well,
it
it's,
works.
I mean, we all learned about the three branches of government, but county government is blurred. I mean, the Constitution blurs the executive and legislative. And then that makes it easy to just kind of not treat the courts as separate as they probably actually are, because executive and legislative are blurred.
Sure.
And we could change that with a charter, hint to my seatmates, but, right now, we're stuck with what's in the default of the Washington Constitution, and it's hard to explain to people
Right.
where you sit, I mean, vis-a-vis us.
Right.
And where we sit, executive function, I mean,
Yes.
There's no situation that removes the responsibility and the authority of creating the most important policy document for the entire county that you are subject to, and everybody, like, the budget is the commissioners, and that, I mean, the relationships are complex, but there's no moving that responsibility or even piecing it out, you know, to other folks. Like, the end of the day, even though it sucks that the county commissioners get to say, yeah, you're gonna lose some of your budget this year, that's, I mean, that's within their authority, and it has to be.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, we're just complaining about the decision you made. I'm not saying you
I
didn't have the
wasn't here.
authority to make it.
I'll
No, I
complain right
know.
with, I'm gonna come sit over
I'm
there.
talking to Commissioner Mejia and Commissioner Menzer.
You guys voted for it.
No, last meeting.
You swore to it.
It's all the treasurer's fault.
Yeah, if only he'd make more money.
Right?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
should be on the next slide, how you guys
That's
can make
right,
more money.
just a
And then-
dollar sign. And I agree with what Leonard says. You know, the chart we proposed, you know, probably would have the board right above the county manager, and then the board above the legislative portion, and then both going up to, you know, the people, and then the court independent. You know, I do recall looking at the San Bernardino County org chart, which didn't have a court anywhere on it.
You know, several, I
Right.
think maybe about 20 years ago, the courts pulled out, but now they report as a function of the state office.
Right.
And what that court administrator said, we wish we were part of the county, because getting things done through the state takes 4 times as long, and getting budget appropriation, you're now in a long line of needs with the state, so good luck getting those needs local.
Right.
So, you know, there's always a whole bunch of different ways to do it.
Yeah, yeah, there are. But the point being that San Bernardino County had no authority over the courts. They go to the state. Here, the state has shown a distinct unwillingness to step up and help the counties with, you know, providing judicial services. I've been doing this for a long time. I was the legislative chair for the judges for many years, where we have proposed various measures for the state to get more actively involved in funding courts and organizing courts. And we've talked about a unified court system in the state of Washington, which would make a heck of a lot of sense, but it hasn't happened. That's, you know, the judges have put that proposal before the legislature, and it wasn't passed. And there, you know, people have different interests, and it hasn't passed. So I'm not opposed to that at all, but that's not the way we exist now. But we do exist as a separate but equal branch, and we need to accurately reflect that. I recognize that there are implications of that, and we're here to work with you through those issues, but I do think we have to have the leeway to, you know, organize ourselves. And on Frankie's, I'm sure it's still in the HR job title for his position, it says court administrator. And he's not that, he's a court executive officer. And so we changed the sign, you know, we just took, as I would say to Ty sua sponte, we made the decision to name him the court executive officer. So we want to be able to do at least those things that let us know that we can structure ourselves in the way that best allows us to do our jobs. Then we have to come to you and say, okay, here's where we are. How do we fund this? And we will ask for funding. You know, I'm not going to pretend this is a zero-cost game. It's not. And we'll make our arguments, and you're going to decide whether you think what we've pitched is good or not good, and you'll make that decision. And we understand that. You are right, you have the funding authority, and we are dependent on that for funding our services. But we should be able to organize how we want to organize, create the positions as they best fit the organization and the mission that we have. So that's the first step. The second step will be us constantly coming to you with budget requests.
You have one very important slide here, see at the end, kind of making.
Yes, yeah, let me get to that, yeah, because I know,
10 minutes or so.
yeah, Jeff is gonna say, you stop talking. Okay.
Oh, this is good. I'm just gonna soft pedal him.
Yeah. You're gonna be like the nice guy.
Good cop, bad cop.
All right, so we complained about the budget decision. That was one of my goals, was to come in here and complain about that, and I felt indicated that I complained, and Frankie joined me in that. The last thing we want to point out is, and I know some of you have heard this before, that we have when I said historically, when I opened up by saying historically, we just have felt like district court in particular has sort of suffered from this approach as just another department in the county. Years ago, when they first started looking at the possibility of a new courthouse, there was a labor survey which showed that district court had less than 50% of the staffing it needed for the work it had at that time, and that was like 10 years ago. Another way of looking at that, besides us constantly referring to that one study, is to look at where we are by way of caseloads, which isn't a full description of the work of the court, because the work of the court also can be made more complicated by a variety of things, but caseloads is one general way to look at it. So within county, Thurston County is approximately the 6th most populated county in the state. Our caseload reflects that. We have approximately the 6th heaviest caseload of any county in the state. The number of employees we have relative to our caseload compared to other counties in the state, we are 28 out of 37 counties with FTE relative to caseload. Where by population and caseload, we're 6. We are 28 relative to the other counties. So another way of looking at it is if we look at our neighbor, Pierce County. Pierce County has 63% more FTEs per caseload for Pierce County District Court than Thurston County does. Whatcom County has 83% more FTEs per case than Thurston County. Clark County, which is 168% more FTE per case than Thurston County has. Now, we don't need to be at Clark County level. Love to be at Whatcom, love to be at Pierce, if we could just be a little better than we are. So if we go back to,
It's really interesting to see Clark County on there because they're the only county that's lower law enforcement staffing than Thurston. So, you know, we hear about how, oh, if the law enforcement staffing is going to generate the case, but obviously in Clark, there's a totally different dynamic going on or a different set of priorities.
right, yeah. So if we look at this diagram here, it has, I believe, 11 positions in red on there. And that's, we would ask for an increase in 11 positions, which would bring us up maybe to, well, not, it wouldn't get close to, we'd need 20 to get to Pierce County. So it would be half of that. So it would be maybe get us in the 30% above where we are FTE per case. But I think that's a really good way of looking at this. Is we have historically been very low FTE per case, and we continue to be even worse because our numbers continue to drop. So we are 28 out of 37 counties with the ability to administratively support the caseload we have. And that's the point I think I just, last thing, oh, and the last thing I wanted to point, on that on this diagram, up on top is what I call Frankie's funnel. And Frankie uses this when we talk about things like Prop 1, which was the public safety issue, which provided funds for the prosecutor and for law enforcement. Well, that money goes up at the top. And all the cases that it generates, they come down to the bottom, and there was no money to respond to the increase in cases that are coming our way. You know, Prop 1's going to take a while to work its way through the system, but it's clear you can't have more officers and you can't have more prosecutors without getting more cases. We will have more cases, and there was no funding to support that more cases. So that's another part of why we need to rethink this whole idea of courts being separate but equal. So you wouldn't see a diagram like that. If you were going to do something to enhance prosecutorial activity or law enforcement activity, you would recognize that there is going to be a concurrent impact on the courts. And if you want to fund law enforcement and prosecutor, then you're going to need to figure out how to equally support the caseload that's going to be generated. And looking at us as just another department in the county, in my mind, allows that issue to sometimes be forgotten. So I'll finish with that.
Well, I think, just one last point on, as far as with Frankie's funnel. The other piece is what we kind of talked about with recidivism rates, warrants and everything like that. What ends up happening as that need kind of grows on top and the bottom, the court's part isn't appropriately funded, we see that increase in recidivism rates, we see the increase in warrants, we see an increase in the need. So what is at the bottom that can't be addressed now goes to the top. That funnel starts getting wider and wider at the top. Then we as a county need to start addressing the need. We start from the top down and we go, okay, so we have this greater need. Now we need more law enforcement to address that need. Attorneys, prosecutors, then the courts. Again, if we start slamming everything down through that funnel without appropriately supporting the courts, all those recidivism issues, everything that we could be addressing on the court level, then get shot right back up into the need, and we continue to grow the top of that funnel, making the justice system much less efficient.
And for those wishing to catch a Veterans Court graduation, we actually have one tomorrow at 10:30. So for Willie Holden, Willie will be graduating. So if you can't make it in person, which it would be great if you can, but if you can't and you want to watch it on YouTube, we live stream everything we do in court. And I don't know if Leonard knows that every case that comes across Thurston County District Court is available on YouTube.
Oh,
And you can watch it around the world. So
I didn't know that.
that's one of the things, we are the only court in the state, I think, that does that. And we really emphasize being transparent with the work that we do. So there's our introduction to you.
What time is that?
10:30.
Okay, thank you.
We're stuck in a 9 to 12 work session.
Well, it stays up for a while afterwards, so if you're really interested, you can watch.
Just till the 12.
And Commissioner Klaus, I was indicating to the rest that you came to a recent graduation and saw that.
Yeah, and I think about it a lot, and we have the therapeutic court proclamation coming up, I think, here pretty soon, so it's been on my mind. It's hard to forget. Definitely moving.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
You noted that the probation was the only kind of non-mandated service. But looking at this chart, it sort of has the mental health and the mental health and veterans court. Are those mandated? I mean, or are they best management practices, basically?
Well, okay, so what I should have qualified was under general funding, probation is the only non-mandated function. Mental health court, veterans court is supported by treatment sales tax.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Which, the commissioners, to their great credit, years ago had the guts to do it when there was a period of time in which a lot of county commissions were doing it. In fact, I went around the state speaking to county commissions, encouraging them to do it, and had a lot of, they were way am I passing a tax response. But it has really served, in my opinion, the citizens of this community by allowing us to have really proactive therapeutic programs that really support the need.
Robert, is that, it's from TST funds it? Does the Veterans Fund, is that allowed to?
I'd have to look at the rules of the Veterans Fund, but we have funded all of our therapeutic courts through TST.
Okay, anything else for the district court? Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Treasurer's up next.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah. They're all warmed up, Jeff.
Yeah, I can see.
Like, we're pulling back Veterans Fund dollars from over there, and
Yeah, we'd have
there's
to,
no shortage of demand for TST funds.
I would have to suss that out.
All right, we got
Good
Treasurer
afternoon.
Evans here.
Hey, you're going from an even-handed judge to your banker, so you guys have an exciting life. I just, my report's all verbal today, but I do want to express, because I don't think I've had a chance to, or haven't taken the opportunity to, one of my frustrations with the classification study that was done. So I've got the three frontline people on the customer service counter. that are classified as senior customer service representatives. Those are the only 3 positions in the county that have that classification, so it's unique to my office. And it makes it difficult to go out and find comparisons. I was hoping out of that classification study that they would be recommended to be slotted into another classification as part of the consolidation, because I mean, that's one of the difficult things with our classification program. And Maria and I have frequent conversations about it, is there's this wide swath of descriptions. Trying to get them consolidated has been a goal ever since I can remember being here.
Most people are trying to get theirs out and separate them, and you're trying to put them in. We should try to help you do that, because as Commissioner Mejia said, that helps us, create consistency and comparability and ease of, administration.
Well, and it makes it easier to go out and shop for comparables, right? To find things that might be a little bit closer in description to what your classification is, so when you're comparing apples and apples, which is, each county operates a little differently, but the more consolidation there can be, the easier it is on everybody.
It also makes it easier to, if you can identify for major skill sets or major needs that you have in that position, to throw the net wider and get more applicants rather
Yes.
than have such specific, and we tend to do that in government, say, this position at this desk is gonna have this job description. So you're gonna do recruitment, and then the MQs look, or minimum qualifications look very specific, and people don't even understand what that is.
Right.
They may understand customer service at a service desk, because that's universal, a lot of different businesses. So I'm with you at looking at how we do that, because the whole goal is the more narrow we get, the folks that are applying that are normally outside of government don't understand it, and then we suffer because then we get a smaller list, and sometimes the skill sets don't translate all the time.
Was it just overlooked by the study, or was there some determination, analysis made that yours are somehow unique and don't connect to others? I can't remember how the study addressed that particular.
I think it was kind of a combination of those 2 things, talking to Maria. But, when I think of a customer service representative, I don't think of a person that's handling tens of thousands of dollars in cash a day. I don't think of somebody that has to have the knowledge of how to read a legal description to find out if a transfer document is accurate or not. Customer service, to me, is more of a greeter type person, and they'll have some responsibility, maybe some administrative responsibility, but nothing technical. So I think, I know Maria's expressed to me other frustrations she's got with the classification study that was done, and it just, but that's water under the bridge now, so. But I do want to talk a little bit about, so a few months ago, I told you I'd gone out for RFP for banking services and merchant services, and I'll let you all know that we've reached the end of that road, and we've elected to stay with Key Bank for banking services and Point and Pay for merchant services. A couple of the other banks that submitted proposals had better online platforms than Key Bank, but Key Bank has the number of branches, they've got the local customer service, there was a lot of pluses in their favor. Plus their pricing was pretty aggressive, and they've made it very clear that they're going to continue that practice because they want our business. Point and Pay, again, there was, each of the banks did have a merchant services component. We were hoping that would result in better pricing. It really didn't. And then the other 2 independent merchant services providers. Again, with Point and Pay, we've had issues in the past, but I was very impressed when they came into their demonstration interview. They talked about that. We had them a couple of pretty significant stumbles on tax days a couple of years ago, and the vice president of the company was actually the one that came in and did the pitch along with our local customer service representative, and I was very impressed. But they explained that part of their past issues, in 2019, they made the decision to shift from having physical servers to going to the cloud. And they were there for 2 years, 2020, 2021, and part of 2022. And that was when they had their major service lapses. And so now they've gone back to owning their own servers. And I got to admit that their service lapses have not been as significant as they were in the past.
Can you remind me what merchant services encompasses?
Credit card acceptance, payment acceptance. So anyway, that's good news to have that behind us, and I gotta give a lot of credit to Nicole Mugi in my office because she was the lead on that particular RFP, and we both agreed we are never, ever doing those two services at the same time again. Tax collections are right on track with where we expect them to be. One big change, and this was echoed by every other county treasurer that I've communicated with, is we are almost back to pre-COVID foot traffic levels in the office. Very interesting and kind of a shock. And the other thing is we have more people this time that paid with cash than we've ever had in the past. Yeah, it was remarkable how many people were paying in cash this time.
And is there a way to pay online as well? Like, is there-
Absolutely.
And so people are opting to come in.
Yeah, or you can call on the phone, you can do an e-check, that's free, there's no charge for that. You know, so.
It's a lot nicer to come here than the previous location.
So I shouldn't be so nice then?
I mean, I don't know if
I
that
should
has to
tell
do
my
with-
staff to bark a little bit?
I'm saying the physical location
Yeah, it
is
is.
much more inviting and much more conducive to having a good experience.
I agree, I agree with that.
So one of the goals, though, is to increase the use of online pay.
Yes,
And it's going the other way now, huh?
it did this time, so, you
Interesting.
know, I'll go through a couple more tax periods before I call it a trend.
We're also way more centrally located physically.
Well, I think the building is more inviting. I think Wayne really hit it on the head there. It's a more inviting building, it's a more comfortable place to be.
I guess I would argue with that. I would say that people are just practical and can, you know, like if I gotta do something, I'm gonna Google it. And if I live in Lacey, which is where most people live, it's the biggest city, and you gotta squirrel your way through downtown Olympia and around the Deschutes Parkway and up the hill to a place you've never seen that's buried on the top of a hill.
Dark,
Yeah.
creepy.
Versus Pacific, versus Pacific Avenue, right on the Lacey Olympia border,
Sure.
like in the
Yeah.
exact center of the
Surrounded by
county.
marijuana shops and taco trucks.
Yeah, places you're gonna be going
Yeah.
anyway. I mean, I would just think that that's gonna make people come here. Before
I-
they even sign, you know, before they even know that it's actually
Brochure.
nice inside.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Well, but I think the facade of the building is more inviting than the other. I've never considered that up there.
The mansard roof never made you excited to come.
Anyway, so I don't have anything significant beyond that to report today. Yes,
I was going to ask you about, I know you are in queue for a system upgrade and kind of talk to the board about that and kind of where it's at in the process. And I know that the ERP, right, is, we're lifting that one up, so, but if you could talk to the board about that system, the new system.
so we've had three preliminary demonstrations, which of course are not full-on demonstrations. And we do have a favorite of the ones we've seen so far. The Tyler product looks really impressive. But of course, when we go through the RFP process and once we lay out our specific requirements, they will have to be able to say whether they can meet those requirements or not. Tyler's operated in Washington State, not with tax collection software yet, but they've operated in the state for years with our financial systems and such.
Don't they operate the court thing?
Tyler Technologies
Odyssey?
with
Yeah,
Odyssey.
yes. Yeah, well, not every product is gonna be a gold mine, right? Pierce County just recently converted the tax collection software to Tyler, so we're anxious to see what their experience with that is. I can't wait to talk to Mike Lonergan about how this tax time went with that. One more thing I wanted to mention, REIT is down. In fact, this is the lowest year in 20 years. It's not significantly lower than last year, but it is lower than last year. And again, this all dials back to mortgage rates. The average mortgage rate in the United States right now is 375. Most of us that had the means got a 275 or a 3 mortgage. And so you don't want to sell if you're going to have to buy in a 7 market. And so there's no house inventory out there. And so we're watching it, but I just want to make you aware that the volume is down a little, because then nobody also has any incentive to refi.
Treasurer questions?
No? You let me off easy. Oh, I am.
You came with a good note there. in
You
terms
didn't
of
give
the
us a
lesson.
PowerPoint to pick apart.
Right?
You didn't tell us how many FTs.
Actually, I've got a couple of significant retirements that are gonna happen next year. And so I am going to be coming in asking for a couple of reclassifications, but what I have in mind, will probably eliminate an FTE in my office, so.
How many retirements?
Huh?
How many retirements?
They haven't announced for sure,
Oh,
except
okay,
one.
so sorry, okay.
One for sure, and another one I'm anticipating.
Okay. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to meet with the treasurer. Say that.
That's good to know. Yeah, oh, and I do want to add, so, I don't know, we need to set up a regular lunch. I have lunch on a monthly basis or with Carolina and Ty, and I'd love to hold the offer out there to have regular lunches with you. I just think those one-on-one informal meetings are really good to have.
You want to start doubling up? You want to double up with us?
Sure.
It's a new world, Board of County Commissioners.
Yeah.
All of us.
It is,
Great
that's,
efficiencies.
yeah.
If you're going to start adding more, then you're just going to be out at lunch every day.
Right. That's one of my favorite meals to go out for. So, yeah, so thank you.
Okay, well, that is the end of our agenda. No commissioner items today. It's not on the agenda, so you don't get to raise any.
It's not, I do have a commissioner item.
County managers?
Anything to add?
Oh, could I get some neon lights around my office window so everybody knows which one's mine?
Done.
All right, you guys, have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
What else do you have, Commissioner?
I'll be getting up in the morning. I'll be getting ready to go to Texas.
What do you got?
You free Friday morning?
Let me see.
There's a delegation from West Africa of about 100 folks that the EDC is hosting at the Great Wolf Lodge, and they're looking for a county leader to come and address them.
Interesting. What time?
9 a.m.
Send me the details and I'll
Okay.
talk to the team upstairs. It might be something I have to move around, but it might be doable.
I'm covering study for,
Well, I figured
For
you'd get
Wayne.
steady.
Well, I have a doctor's appointment and then building code council, so I won't even be able to go study.
So I'm covering study. Ways at LLC, yeah, no.
So, okay, can we forward that to you? Then you can find, if not you,
I think I can find time.
Commissioner Edwards, maybe?
I will let Michael know.
Okay. We can, no, I know, I was thinking, no, well, that'll be up to you, I was saying, just, never mind, I was speaking, I was letting my brain say things that needs to keep in.
Is that all you had there, Commissioner? Forney?
Yes, I'm sorry.
All right, we're adjourned.